She says, looking for it. Decoding the hiring process with CVs and interviews techniques, etc. So I am Jane Johnson, and I'm a co-CEO of AFA. And presenting for us today are Adam and James from Hunter Healthcare, who are supporters of AFA and sponsors of the Chief Data and Analytical Officers Network. I think we'll probably just give it another couple of minutes to see if anyone else comes in. Just to ask if people could please remain on mute until they are asking questions. And also, this is the second of two sessions on the hiring process. The first one last week is on our hub. It's been recorded, and this one is also being recorded and will also be shared on the Alpha Hub afterwards. Also, you probably would have seen some communications going out for some more support sessions in May, for mental resilience. So we're now up to, I'm just looking to see how many people we're expecting. Round about just over 40, and we now have just under half of that in. Do you want to just start, Adam and James? Because I'm going to pass over to Adam and James, and they're going to run the sessions now. I will drop out, switch off my camera and my microphone, etc., so I can listen as well. So if you're happy, I'll just pass over to you both now. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, lovely. Okay, thank you.
Hello. First of all, thank you all for joining us today. Today's process is called Decoding the Hiring Process, in which we'll be talking about CVs, interviews, and beyond. In terms of exactly what we'll be covering, so first of all, myself and Adam will start with some introduction. The second section, what employers really want. Third section, CV tips, how to stand out on paper. The fourth section, how to prepare yourself for interviews and boost confidence. The fifth one will touch on some scenario-based questioning using the STAR format. The sixth section, some practical tips for building confidence. And finally, a Q&A session. Generally, when we do these things, we like it to be quite conversational. So if anyone has any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them, and we'll answer them at the end of the slide. Or at the end, if we have time, there'll be a Q&A section there to ask, but feel free to post anything in the chat, and we'll answer it when we get to it. So my name is James Morris. I am the head of BI analytics and data warehousing for NHS and consultancy at Hunter Healthcare. I've been here now for around 8 years. I joined as a researcher and helped grow out the information practice. Since then, my role's changed slightly because we brought into a company called Quantum that specialises in AI, machine learning and population health. And a lot of it has been building out that side. Adam?
Yeah, hi everyone. Adam Britton, head of BI analytics, data warehousing for NHS, but also the private healthcare and life sciences side. I've not been with Hunter for as long as James, but I've been in recruitment for circa 20-25 years. So yeah, my role is to build on the NHS work that James has done with the guys, and then also explore private healthcare, and then eventually we will look to piggyback some of our life sciences work that we already do.
Fantastic. So what are employers looking for? So typically employers will look for experience within the same field that you're applying for. So for example, if you're applying for an acute organisation, in an ideal world, typically they'll want you to have acute experience, the same for community, mental health, and commissioning organisations. It's important to reference that experience in your profile, although typically they'll see that with the name of the organisation. A lot of the time with commissioning organisations, for example, you may be looking at certain data sets which provider use. So if you are applying for those sort of roles, it's definitely worth referencing the data sets that you may have used from a slightly different standard as opposed to working within the organization. Previous data sets that are essential for the role. These could be buzzwords such as SUS, SLAM, RTT, UEC. Reference the tools of which you work with that are currently at the organization. These could be tools such as Power BI, SQL, Tableau, Excel is obviously a fairly common one. You'll tend to find that these are listed within the job descriptions themselves. So if you see anything that matches the job description that you've used for in a commercial aspect, definitely important and useful to reference it on the CV. Communication skills. I get how it can be difficult at times to list how you're good at this on paper, because typically that will come across from a conversation. But a lot of the roles that you'll be going for, that they'll need a good communicator, someone who's able to articulate well what's going on. Understanding of NHS priorities and metrics. So examples of this could be cancer wait times, certain referral to treatment, and then the ability to problem solve under pressure. As we all know, we're up against it at the moment in terms of duties, and it's important to be able to deliver those duties under certain time demands. In terms of CV tips, which a few of the questions that we got building up to this was how to build a CV outside of NHS jobs. I know that a lot of you on the call and some of the names that I recognise will have only worked within the NHS. But for those that are looking to build a profile outside of that, typically starting with a really strong personal statement. So a strong personal statement clearly expresses your motivations, relevant experience and goals, showing how they align with the opportunity that you're applying for. Typically using a confident and authentic voice, and back up your passion with specific examples that highlight your skills and suitability. For this, we see as good. It's a short, punchy paragraph, effectively talking through why you're interested in the role and why you're good for it. We tend to find that in terms of flow, using bullet point for achievement works better. So this will be one or maybe two sentences succinctly summarising what you've done in that task or duty. Tailoring each CV to the job description. This is really important because although certain roles may share similarities in job titles, BI manager, analyst, heads of BI, every job is unique. So it's important to spend the time in terms of getting to know that job description and not necessarily relying on the application that you put in last time. It's super key for this. Make sure you spend the time. Including NHS words and key outcomes. With emerging technologies and constantly changing terminology, it's important to reference what you're doing at the moment. NHS Fabric, for example, there may be certain one on the call that have had the chance to get exposure to those, or perhaps done some training in a personal circumstance. Buzzwords as well, right sizing, I know is incredibly popular in terms of operational form, in terms of operational language at the moment. So any sort of current terminology that you can reference in that CV is going to be useful. In terms of common mistakes, sorry, I missed a point there. In terms of building up your online presence through LinkedIn, whilst not essential for the role, a lot of employers will tend to click on your or search to see if you have a LinkedIn to find out more about you. So we tend to find it useful to have that profile, reference any sort of training that you've done, any work experience, make sure it's up to date as well. Myself and Adam, if we're unsure on a candidate because perhaps they haven't referenced the right experience on their CV, we will have a look on their LinkedIn. Some people tend to keep their LinkedIn up to date more than others, and if we can clearly see that you've done stuff that's referenced, you're more likely to be followed up with, and that's the same for hiring within the NHS. In terms of common mistakes, too generic or too long. There's never really a perfect length for a CV. We tend to find anywhere between sort of 2 to 4 pages, but make sure that what's included on those 2 to 4 pages is relevant to the role that you're applying for. Please don't feel the need to pad it out with experience that might not be relevant, because ultimately that will be looked over by the hiring manager, and it's effectively just not worth being in there, which links nicely into the next one, no outcomes or quantifiable impact. So in terms of quantifiable impact, what you were brought in to do and what did you achieve? Many people will hit their targets in their roles, and hiring managers will want to see what your personal targets were and how you performed against them. You may be going for an increase in banding, and typically roles at a high level may have increased targets, meaning it's important to reference where you feel you've overperformed. Jargon without context. Words like azure can often be thrown into a CV without necessarily any need, but we have found, that candidates feel as though referencing certain technologies like that will make it more likely for them to either be called back or have an interview because they look like they're showing up. They look like they're keeping up to date with current times, but in reality, if you're referencing jargon without context, it's pointless. Ignoring layout and formatting. So often when you're moving bits around, whether it's on NHS jobs or whether it's on your personal profile, a lot of the formatting can be out of sync, the bullet points, everything that comes along with that. You want your CV to read very uniform and have a pattern to it when you're referencing the roles and what you're doing within them. So make sure you spend a bit of time just making sure that everything looks the same. For those that are unsure of how to reference certain bits or improve certain bits, feel free to Google it. I often do with Microsoft Word when I'm struggling with formatting errors. So hopefully you can do the same. Rushing an application as well. I think it's really easy, especially with people's limited time at the moment, to see something that we feel are relevant for, send through an application and hope that the experience on there was good enough. However, it might be that, for example, the BI manager position that you applied for last month is actually very different to what they're looking for a BI manager here. So make sure you spend the time to read that job brief, understand what they're looking for, and tailor the application from there. I think we've got a question from Carla.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, for example, if you've had substantial experience doing something else, and actually, like most of the examples you could potentially use came from your previous experience. I don't know, how would you tailor your CV, or because you mentioned it's probably not worth including things that are not relevant.
Yeah, good question, Carla. Thank you for asking. So typically in roles where a lot of the stuff that you've done recently might not be relevant to that, we tend to move that experience towards the back of that section within that role. So when an employer is looking at your suitability for the role, they'll read your job title, the position, the nature of the organization. Does it match? I.e., you worked in the acute, this is an acute, great. How long you've been in the role, and then they'll start reading the experience. So typically the first part of that experience that they're reading within roles, you'll want to make sure that all your relevant experience is included as far up as possible, so to speak, within the context of that role. There's a danger of if that experience isn't drawn out quick enough, they might start reading and go, not relevant for this. Let's go to their previous role to see if there's any experience that's relevant in that one. So my answer to that would be, if that is the case, please make sure that you've included the relevant experience as high up on within that job title as possible. If that makes sense, Carla?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
No worries. So next up we have interview preparation. So as you know, interview preparation, it's important to do your research. So understanding the trust priorities. So this can be done with a Google, going on the trust website and finding out what the agenda is. There will also be a lot of other organisations. Some of you may have logins to sites such as HSJ online. There's also articles on a website called Digital Health, which we found incredibly useful in terms of being able to find out what trusts are up to at the moment. You could quickly search by an organisation on there and find out anything relating to either digital or data projects. which we also find as well is quite a good talking point to the people within the organisations. Digital health as well, I don't believe you have to sign up for as HSJ. I think certain parts of it may be for a paid, may be viewed on a paid basis. So next up, reviewing the job description carefully. We've touched on this a couple of times, but it's highly likely that when you're in interview, you'll be asked scenario-based questions around the specific duties in the role. So can you talk through times of when you've developed dashboards for UEC data in Power BI? For example, if that was one of the duties, you'd want to be able to prepare yourself for that through answering what you've done. Map your experience to key responsibilities. As I say, we often find in interviews that people will ask or look to draw upon your experience through asking around duties within the role. So please, if you can go through and perhaps add a couple of points under each of those around where you might have either completed that task or completed similar duties before. And then is this you, Adam, or is this me?
This one's still you, James.
Still me, lucky me. So next up is the STAR technique. And typically when referencing experience in a CV, we'll like to use the STAR format. So situation, set the scene, what you were there to do. Task, what was the challenge, what you were asked to do. Action, what did you do? And result, what was the outcome? So an example for this could be, can you tell me about a time you've used data to influence a decision? So the situation, in my previous role at a healthcare trust, we noticed a rise in A&E wait times and management was unsure of the root cause. Task, I was asked to analyse patient flow data to identify any trends or bottlenecks contributing towards delays. Action, I extracted and cleaned 3 months worth of A&E data and used SQL and Excel to analyse patterns by time of day. Patient type and staffing levels. I created a dashboard in Power BI to visualise peak hours and cross-referenced it with root data. The analysis revealed a consistent spike in category 3 cases during weekday afternoons, coinciding with reduced staffing in triage. Result. Based on my findings, the trust adjusted triage staffing during those hours. Within 6 weeks, average A&E wait times dropped by 18% and senior management used the dashboard for ongoing performance monitoring. I think we had a question there. Oh, that's for Jane. STAR format is also used for professional registrations applications. So yeah, for us, the STAR format is key in being able to succinctly describe a certain duty within that role.
Good.
Adam.
Thanks, James. So where we're getting to now, obviously the STAR technique, we're starting to get into the actual interview process. And your application's obviously been accepted, and now you're at the business end of getting yourself a role. So we want to give you some advice around interviews and the sort of things that you should be thinking about. We obviously see lots of interviews. We have lots of people going for interviews, so we've built up our knowledge over a number of years and different scenarios. For you guys, you might not have that much exposure to interviews. Some of you might be in a recruiting position, so you have to interview people, but it's always slightly different when the shoe's on the other foot. So hopefully we can give you a little bit of advice and some tips around what you should be thinking about going into an interview. Similarly, some of you might be on your journey at the early part of your journey, so this should hopefully be helpful for you as well. But one of the main things is give yourself the best opportunity by practicing clear and structured responses. There's nothing worse than silence in an interview, but sometimes silence has to be there. So you just need to give yourself as much time. So what I would always recommend is prepare yourself prior, try and run through some responses, try and structure your responses prior, use the STAR technique to come up with some examples, and then feed that into the recent projects that you've carried out or been part of. Try and think of some scenarios and some practice those before you go in, so that they are not verbatim, but you've got them to be able to tap into as and when you need them. we always find that communication is key, but also being able to communicate insights to non-technical people. This is a great community and everyone will understand what we're talking about, but there are stakeholders that won't be technical. So being able to talk to those non-technical people is also really important. I just saw a question come up, but I'll come back to that once I finish the slide. You'd be surprised the amount of times we hear that there's been a technical problem when doing an MS Teams or a Zoom call for an interview. Please, please, please make sure you take the time to check your tech, check your lighting, check your sound. Are you in a room that is accessible to small children or animals? All those little things that can come up, try and make sure that you mitigate those things. Just running through the link prior to your actual conversation so that you don't have that awful gut-wrenching moment realizing that your MS Teams isn't working and you've got to get your phone out and then it looks like it's really poor from the other end. All those little things that you need to think about, try and prepare correctly. So run through those things, give yourself plenty of time, make sure that your tech is working, because that's really, really important. We would always recommend doing a test run. Set up a friend ahead of a call, ensure everything is working in advance, make sure that you've done your preparation correctly, because although a lot of interviewers will say no, it's not a problem whatsoever, you don't want to set yourself aside from the other 2-3 people that are interviewing. If your tech wasn't working and you didn't mitigate that, then that might be the thing that doesn't get you a role. So control the controllables. Anything that's uncontrollable, don't worry so much about. But if you can control it, make sure that you are on top of it. Let me just see what the questions. So we had a question from Naya. Tips. Got any tips or advice for 10 years NHS data experience, but now looking for jobs non-NHS or outside of healthcare? That falls into my remit. So the good thing about data, and this is why I always explain to people, data is transferable across any industry fundamentally because it underpins everything that we do. It's the foundations of all organizations. It's just how different organizations access that data and how they want to interpret that data. So for me, if you've got lots of data experience, you need to emphasize your core data experience and not necessarily reference the NHS so much. If you're looking to get completely out of the NHS and completely out of healthcare, then you need to go into the tech, you need to go into the core principles that you've learned or developed. Even saying that, I think there's still some crossover. So projects are projects. It doesn't matter what it depends on what data you're dealing with. But I think if you can show examples of the projects that you've done and the results that you've got using the STAR technique, I think that's transferable. So it depends now how far you're trying to get away from the NHS and which industries you're going in. If you come to me and say you're looking to get into luxury goods, then look, that's quite a few steps away. So you really need to drill into what they need and what core skills you have that are transferable. So it's all about trying to identify those transferable skills. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of advice. If you need any more, give me a shout afterwards. I'll be more than happy to run through things in a little bit more depth. But obviously we've got a little bit of a time limit. Was there another question? Did I see a hand?
It was from Tejas.
Hey Adam, hey James. Great presentation, guys. Just a quick question here. When we talk about STAR technique, right? And I get it, it depends on the role, right? For example, currently, if I'm in a lead position and the next job is for a managerial role, so I was given a feedback in one of those interviews that maybe I drilled too much on the action bit, but too less on the result bit, because I think a managerial or a senior leadership level role will be more interested what the result or impact was versus how you achieved it. You get it? And I think at times it's difficult to judge, right? Like whether I should talk about this more or so. So what's the workaround? So do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I think for me, yeah, it's always tricky because you never 100% know what they're looking for. You've obviously got to pick up on cues, bodily cues. If there's a tell from they maybe don't know what you're talking about. But I think what I would always do is try and when you get to a section and you repeat it and say, does that make sense to you? Do you need any more detail? No. Okay, great. So this is the result. So if you do that, if you say, okay, this was my action, would you like me to go into any more detail? Because I can do. No. Okay, great. Then move on. And this is the result. This is the result of what happened. So I think don't be afraid to say, do you feel that was enough detail? And throw it back to the line manager to say, are you happy with that answer? And you can say, and then you can get all the way to the very end of it and say, look, I'd be more than happy to go through that example again. Do you need any more context? Do you need any more information? And just ask them to see if they're happy with your response. And then that gives you the obviously the confidence that you've answered the question.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, guys.
No
Yeah,
worries.
definitely. I think to build upon that, for the star format to work, each section has to build upon the other one. So there's a chance that obviously if we're adding too much detail into the action part, we're going to be watering down the result, because there could be actions that we've done in there that haven't fed into that. So that for it to work perfectly, they have to build upon each other. So if you feel like what you're talking about in action, there was no result or resolution to it, might not be worth mentioning in that, because they wouldn't want to see that you've potentially started stuff that haven't finished.
Perfect. So we are done the prep now. So now we're moving on to something that came up quite a lot when we went through the feedback from what people were interested to hearing about. And they wanted to get some advice and our take on some of the common scenario questions that we're encountering at the moment. Because obviously, whenever we have a candidate interview, we always do a debrief with them afterwards, whether it's permanent or contract. We cover both sides. So we always make sure that we have as much market intel as we can, because we want to prep every candidate that we work with as fully as we can. So some of the common scenarios that are coming up at the moment, or scenario based questions. A clinician doesn't understand your report. What do you do? So that's coming up regularly, and you've probably all experienced it, where a clinician who's at the front line doesn't really understand your report. So you have to think about a scenario that you can use the star technique to overcome that clinician doesn't understand your report. Again, I'll come back to Bhavana a little bit after I've done the questions, otherwise I'll never get through them. A similar thing that's coming up a lot: a stakeholder challenges your data. How do you respond? Again, this is a common scenario. I could argue that it's always down to the fact that they don't understand data, so that's why they don't. That's why they're challenging it. But it's our job, and if I link that back to some of the things that we said early on, being able to communicate with non-technical people is vital in the field of data analytics, informatics, business intelligence. Just because you know doesn't mean that they're going to understand it. So sometimes getting back to the core principles of what's gone on, setting that scene is really crucial to ensuring that stakeholders that aren't necessarily technical, you can come back to them when they challenge your data. Certainly, if they are technical and they challenge your data, you've got a different set of things that you've got to deal with. So if the stakeholder is technical, you need to understand what they don't understand and be able to obviously come back to that. We're getting dashboards. Everyone loves dashboards. Some people love them more than others, but we're getting a lot of questions about where have you built a dashboard, or you're building a new dashboard, where do you start? So this is coming up quite a lot at the moment. We're seeing a lot of roles that are coming through that are sort of end to end. So you've got to do the whole process from the sort of back end all the way to the front end and the visualization. So there's lots of questions around dashboards. So that's something to prep yourself on. It's certainly, if it's in the job description, trying to build in the star technique into these three, if they are relevant to the job description, is very useful practice for you guys going into an interview process. Let me just check what the question was and see if I can answer that. So we've got Bhavana. I'm an AI engineer, worked on some research type feasibility products where models didn't go into production for various reasons. Funds, data, lots of reasons. How do I tailor my CV for success? Good question. I would say the role of an AI engineer at the moment, not everything's going to work, but what you've got to come out of is with the learns that you got from that. So sometimes, and I always say this, life isn't perfect. None of us are perfect. As long as you're getting some learns from your projects that you worked on, maybe you've got some things that you would do different technically, or maybe you would do some things that, or use some different software, or whatever it might be. I think sometimes you learn more from mistakes than always your successes. I think that's a crucial thing to do. So it's up to you how you spin it and pivot your viewpoint on that. I would say you can still get some valuable learning from a project that failed. Obviously, if every single thing that you've touched has failed, we might need to go into a little bit more detail on why that consistently happens. But I'm guessing you're going to be part of a bigger team as well, and guidance from senior people within your remit. So I think it's important for you to ensure that, yes, this is what happened, but this is what I learned from that happening. So I think don't be afraid to, obviously you don't want to pepper a CV with lots of failure, but there's no harm in showing that you have learned from what didn't go right and that you can put into action some sort of things to correct that next time. So think about it from that angle. Hopefully you've got some positive examples of things that you have done that have become successful, and can prove that you have some successes as well. Hopefully, Bhuvana, that gives you some help with your question.
Thank you. I think I'll need to kind of think about it a bit more, as you mentioned, because the reasons were mostly that there was no money to kind of use these models, or sometimes the model itself didn't do well because there was not enough data. So, and I was working alone in it's a startup company. So, yeah, I think I'll need to do a bit of thinking on how to tailor this around. Thank you, though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, look, you've got the scenario there. If it's your look, blamed, I wouldn't say that. If you created a model and it wasn't picked up for whatever reason, there wasn't funding or whatever it is, so the model was still successful. There's so much AI, machine learning, automation stuff going on at the moment that there will be countless examples of things not being picked up. Now, whether that's you or the business or whatever it might be. So yeah, just try and think about it from a practical perspective, zone in on the stuff that was successful and did work, and really sort of lean your CV towards that. And I think you should be moving in the right direction.
Thank you.
I think as well, in terms of referencing that experience in a CV and trying to keep it positive, start with why the model was commissioned, how you went about building the model, whether there was any way that in terms of within certain reason, the limited data that you had access to, what that model proved. I think would be quite a useful way of approaching that. So why the model, why there was a need for the model, how you went about building the model, and if any, what that model achieved.
Absolutely. Good stuff. So
Thank you.
no worries. So look, there's some of the common scenario questions. Moving on to the next slide. How do we go about answering these scenario questions? Now, look, I'm not going to regurgitate the STAR technique because I think it's hopefully you've picked up what we were sort of angling towards to ensure that is an effective way to answer. One thing that I always say is if you get a scenario question and you're maybe uncertain what they're asking, if you're unsure of what you're being asked, don't be afraid to sort of slow down, clarify, and ask the context of what they're trying to get at. Obviously, if you know what they're asking, brilliant. You can just sort of go into your STAR process and get through your examples. But I always say I'd rather someone slow it down and ask for clarity and for some context than sort of just regurgitate something that which isn't really relevant. Now, if you're find yourself in a situation where you don't have a relevant example for the question, what I always suggest is to try and find something which is maybe one step removed. So if it's a technology that you haven't used, try and give them an example with a technology you have used, but also then caveat that with I'm a very quick learner. I understand and can pick up systems very quickly. Here's an example of where I've done that with X. This means that I've got transferable skills for Y. So try and keep the flow going with examples that, although they might not be perfect, they are still have some relevance to what they're looking for. Even if you do not know the answer, try and explain your approach. So I think sometimes the methodology is just as important as the technique you're trying to explain, or the example you're trying to give. So try and explain that approach that you've taken, the tools that you use, the steps, how your logic works to solve something, or to try and solve a scenario. Always refer back to your communication on how you communicated with the stakeholders that you were dealing with to deal with something. It's crucial to highlight collaboration and any outcomes. Don't ever feel like the more people that you had involved in your examples, the better it does look, because the more people you collaborate with, it shows your skills at being able to manage situations. Building rapport with those stakeholders, making sure that you knew how important the task was, it was a priority to you. You highlight all that collaboration that you've done, and then you get on to your outcomes, and making sure that your outcomes, as James was saying, making sure that the outcomes are just as important as the action, the scenario, and the task, making sure that it all flows through. I'll come back to that question in a minute. Emphasizing flexibility and problem solving. Fundamentally, scenario questions are there to test your problem solving ability. They tend to be around a problem. So emphasizing your flexibility, really drilling into your problem solving ability, how you think through challenges independently. You don't need support. Those are the sort of things that people are looking for. So make sure that you're giving examples where you've had a problem and you've had to deal with it yourself. Obviously, if it's a problem that you can't deal with, talk about your process. How did you loop other people in? How did you utilize your network to get through to a successful conclusion? And even if you didn't get to a successful conclusion, what did you do to get to the point that actually it wasn't going to be solvable? But problem solving pretty much underpins everything to do with scenarios. So even if you haven't done that exact example, showing that you have the process and the step-by-step processes to get through to an end, that's what people are really looking for. Let's see what the question is. So we have Ibrahim. Can a candidate do everything right, meet all the requirements, prepare thoroughly, present well, and still not succeed? Simple answer, yes. Yes, they can. Yeah, that can. The problem you have with interviews is it's a comparison tool fundamentally. So if you're comparing to someone else who's done all of those things as well, they meet all the requirements, they prepared thoroughly, they presented well, and they might do something a little bit extra. They might have reached out to the line manager beforehand to have a conversation. They might have done more due diligence on the organization or the role. There's lots of factors. The problem with an interview process, it's subjective. So no matter from an objective perspective, everyone can hit all those things that you've said there, but there's still subjectivity involved in an interview. And because there's subjectivity, that's someone's opinion. So yeah, you can do all the things, you can be the best prepared. The amount of times we have a candidate come to us after an interview and said, that was the best interview I've ever done, Adam. I hit everything, smashed it, got on really well with them. And the feedback you get is they didn't get the role. And you're like, oh God. And you get someone come out of an interview and say, awful, hated it, they hated me, and they get the job. It's all down to subjectivity. So you can do everything you can, but what I would always tell everyone is make sure you do all those things. You don't have to necessarily hit all the requirements, because I think you should be pushing yourself in your next job. Certainly if it's a permanent job, you probably shouldn't be able to do everything unless you want an easy life and you just want to do the same thing you've done. You should always be something that you need to grow and get out your comfort zone, but you should always prepare thoroughly, hopefully always present well. So there's going to be, like I said, some external subjectivity factors, which means that you won't get a job. So yeah, unfortunately you can do everything but not always get the job. Hopefully that helps you there, Ibrahim. Moving on. So building interview confidence is very easy for me and James to sit here and throw a load of information at you. But building interview confidence takes time. It does. Some people are naturally good in interviews, some people are naturally not. You've got to understand where your, I suppose, pros and cons are when it comes to your interview. So there are some things that you can do to try and alleviate and give yourself a little bit more confidence. Practice makes perfect. We've heard it all. We tell our kids, keep practicing, you get better. But you really will. So practice with a peer, practice with a friend. I would suggest a peer over a friend because they might have a little bit more understanding of you, and not just you, but also the technical nature of what you will be doing. So that can be really useful. Some people might find it a bit awkward getting a friend to give them an interview, but the more you do it, it's like muscle memory, isn't it? The more you do something, the better you get. If you want to be really brave, record yourself. Actually take a film of you practicing and you'll be surprised. We do lots of presentations, and actually looking back at yourself is a very hard thing from a psychological point of view, but record yourself sometimes and see how you come across. And maybe it's your posture, maybe it's your body language, maybe you're not smiling enough, maybe you're over gesticulating, might be lots of things. So just sometimes do a little bit of due diligence on how you're coming across in interviews. So practice does make perfect. I would say always try and make sure that you have access to your technical knowledge. So always, whether you've written down your technical knowledge, whatever that might be, but always sort of give yourself the best chance to be able to access the information that you need. I would hope that you know your CV inside out, but you'll be surprised the amount of people that maybe have used something to help them write their CV and then subsequently they maybe don't know everything on their CV. Don't be that person. Make sure you know everything that you've put down and make sure that you use the information and have access to that information. Something can also be useful to help out in scenarios when you might not have an answer is just give yourself some personal success stories. Yes, we like the technical, but we're humans and people want to work with humans. So have yourself some access to maybe some personal success stories. I don't know, you've just completed a renovation on your house and you project planned it. You've navigated an offline course which is nothing to do with what you've been doing, but you've passed your Open University, whatever it might be. Have yourself some personal success stories because that is always a good backup if you need to sort of dig into the well of what I've done. Some people really struggle with interviews, so visualization, breathing techniques, anxiety is a real thing, and some people struggle with the one-to-one contact or the interview scenario. So try and give yourself some tricks or techniques to overcome your anxiety, whatever that might be. Try and calm your nerves. Take a minute, ask them to clarify a question to give you that little bit of breathing space to try and calm yourself down. Those are lots of tricks that you can do. You can look at these things up online as well. There's loads of different sort of hints and tricks to try and calm yourself down. And the last point on this slide, and pretty much from me, is always focus on growth, not perfection. This comes back to Bhuvana, what you were saying there. Everyone wants to see growth. They don't necessarily need to see perfection. You don't need to have the perfect scenario answer to everything. I would much prefer to see someone growth and how they're moving forward. It should always be used as an interview. An interview should always be used as a learning process. If you're one of the lucky people that's aced every single interview they've ever been in, there's a few unicorn people out there that have done that, then great. But majority of us have failed at an interview. Me personally, I have. I'm sure James has at some point in his life. And I'm sure all of you have your tales to tell. But use it as a learning opportunity. Try and get that feedback afterwards. What happened? Why didn't I get the role? If you don't get the feedback, don't beat yourself up, move on to the next one, but really focus on growth and don't necessarily worry about perfection every single time, and you should hopefully put yourself in a better position confidence wise. So that is the end of the slides. Obviously we've had some questions throughout, which is good, but feel free to either come off of mute and ask a question or put your hand up and we'll come to you, or similarly put something into the chat. We have Nicholas first up. Nicholas, would you like to ask the question?
Yes, please. So I've got a couple of questions. Going back to the CV, you've said in there about focusing on the format of it. I was just wondering if you had any key examples, or like the sorts of fonts you should be using, the size of the fonts, what should be in there, what shouldn't be, because I know it changes quite often.
Yeah, I mean, there's typically Arial. We tend to find reads quite well. Any font size between 11 and 12, you obviously don't want it too big, you don't want it too small. In terms of laying out the CV, what we like to see is your job title first, so followed by the organisation you worked at, and then also the dates that you're at the organisation. So that would typically be month, then year. If you're still at the organisation at the moment, we just do a little hyphen and then present. And then once you've referenced your job title, the organisation, and the dates, you then start going into bullet pointing your experience, trying to move the experience that's most relevant to the role that you're applying for further up the list as when people are reviewing it. Nicholas?
Okay, thank you for that. And then the other one was around the LinkedIn presence. Is there any do's and don'ts on that? Because you do see some really iffy posts go on there. It can't be that helpful for careers.
Yes.
No, I'm happy to answer that one. I've done, LinkedIn is only so good in terms of it, the best things that you can do on there. The do's that I would always say is always have a strong profile. It's going through the step-by-step process of making your CV. It's like a CV, really. It's an access to a CV which you don't necessarily have control over who sees it. So just make sure that your jobs are in the right order. Make sure your dates are in the right order. You give a little snapshot of who you are. You give a little bit of a profile. If you're not confident commenting on things, then hold back. There's loads of different schools of thought around what you should and shouldn't say. I always say this to people: it's not social media. So don't treat it like that. It's a professional platform, although you'd be surprised from some of the stuff you see. The other things I'd always say is try and keep your connections to a specific sort of connection, as in someone who's going to benefit you in some way, shape, or form. So don't just go connection crazy and try and connect with everyone, because that's when you start getting your feed filled with anything that probably should be on Facebook or some of the other social platforms. I don't have any bias. So yeah, just be a little bit wary of what's on there. But the one thing you should be doing is making sure that your profile looks good and that you've answered all the bits and you've put on there a bit of a breakdown of what you do. But similarly, try and keep your contacts and followers quite sort of, I say, tight in terms of who you want your information to be seen by. So yeah, those are just a couple of things. Again, as we could spend hours talking about do's and don'ts on LinkedIn, but I would say those are the things at the top of my sort of checklist at the moment.
Yeah, for me as well, what I see a lot of at the moment is AI generated content. So people will either write their bios or experience or share articles, for example, that have been written in AI. I think it's very clear to see when an article has been wrote using AI. There's lots of emojis and stuff like that, which ChatGPT likes to use. And it was quite funny actually, because there was a golfing tournament on a couple of weeks ago called the Masters, and when we came into work, we were joking between ourselves, thinking of all the AI related content in relation to the golf tournament, and motivation, and looking at it for career success. And I think one of us had been in like 2 minutes, obviously was checking notifications and stuff, and there already been one. So try not to get lazy with utilizing AI content on LinkedIn, because although you may think it reads well, to a lot of others it may not read well.
Absolutely. No worries. I think there's a question from Lynn in the chat. Should older people include everything in their CV, or just the last 5 years? I've read mixed opinions, so would welcome your take. My take on this is a record of achievement in terms of what you've done. So you've probably been building your CV over a number of years if you've got lots of experience. So I would always have a master copy with everything on it. What I would always suggest is you probably only need to go back 10 years maximum, depending on how many jobs you've had in that. So I would always say 10 years because I think you can show your progression, you can show lots of things. If you've only been in one job for 10 years, then clearly you need to include it on there. I would say anything after 10 years, you just need your job title, your organization, and your amount of time there, because I think otherwise you start to walk into the having 7, 8, 9, 10 pages long CV. So my rough rule of thumb, now there are loads of scenarios where that wouldn't work, but that would be my general rule, is going to go back 10 years, and then anything before that, just have your job title, your organization, and your dates that you were there. And then you can build in from there. But there are a few, I suppose, situations where you would go into more depth. But I think that's a fair reflection. That's certainly myself and James would probably look back that far. James, obviously, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 10 years is suitable, and should be relevant.
Yeah, typically I like to see 10 years. As Adam says, if you've been doing the same role for the last 10 years, it can be quite difficult. But ultimately, within those 10 years, there should be lots of relevant stuff that you're referencing, more examples, perhaps than others who may have done 3 or 4 roles in the last 10 years. There should be more content in there. But yeah, anything past 10 years, if you just list your job title, organization, the dates that you've worked, great, because people will want to see a nice flow, perhaps in terms of progression and seniority, in terms of the type of work that you're doing. And then next up, we have Teus again.
Yes, James. So my question revolves around people who, like me, have a techno-functional background, basically certified in both the modules of EPIC, like started with a configuration analyst and moved to an information analyst, then a healthcare lead, that kind of progression. So how is there any tips for LinkedIn? Because, for example, if you're applying for a managerial position now, and I'm open to both kind of roles, since my experience, again, bringing best of both the worlds. So how not to put enough, because I think my LinkedIn currently have enough information at times in those roles under description, right? Like where I'm clearly highlighting for these 3 years, I have done very functional kind of role, and then I moved to very technical bits like using SSIS, SSM, Power BI, Tableau, SQL, right? So how to get a mixed, I really don't want to differentiate, because in reality it was not like that. It was a mix of both. It was more obvious of all the time, it was a mix of both the worlds kind of thing. So do you have any tips, so that, because if I'm so that if a person, for example, if I've applied for 2 jobs simultaneously, one is pure functional, other is pure technical, it can really look very, like neutral rather than a one-sided kind of thing, right?
Yes, so just confirm, you're asking how to relay your experience across those 3 roles in terms of getting into a managerial role as in the BI space. Is that correct?
Right, BI space or slash a functional space, right? Because if you're open to both the spaces now, right? If I'm applying, so that becomes tricky, right?
Yeah.
Can I just check, is that just purely on LinkedIn, or are you talking in a normal job process? Because
So usually what I do in a normal job process, because I think the power, like you said, right? Because I don't have the power who sees my LinkedIn, but in the application, I have the power. So what I usually go is I prefer to highlight, for example, if I'm applying for a functional managerial role, I will highlight that bits rather than BI. I will also highlight BI, but again, it will be 5th, 6th point, not the first 4 points, right? So I have the power to again strategize my applications, but I don't want to, because if I'm applying to both the jobs right at the same time, and I don't want to sound confused right at this, because uh, if my skill set is relevant to both of them, I think I should be applying to. You get it? Like certain people will be, yeah.
So LinkedIn, it's difficult because ultimately you want the people that are viewing it to, perhaps see you in one certain light, whether that's configuration or whether that's in BI. So
Right.
typically for people that are interested in roles in both functions, because you find them both interesting and you're good at both of them, in terms of a CV, in terms of CVs, I feel it's worth writing 2 CVs. So you have one that's very configuration focused, and perhaps if there's elements of configuration or similar duties in the info analyst role that you've done most recently, include them like that to try and make it get, read more configuration. If you're going for analytical roles, you might try and include more of the, if any, analyst experience from your configuration past. Whether you've used SQL, for example, whether you've written reports, and then obviously elaborate on the information analyst experience. So from a CV perspective, I think it helps to have 2. Likewise with the personal statement as well. People are going to find it confusing if you're applying for analyst roles, for example, and you reference the fact that you're interested in analyst and configuration roles. So I'd recommend having 2 CVs. Try and tailor each CV to the job that you want to go, specifically starting with the personal statement, and try and talk through duties where, as an analyst, you might have done some work that's involved in configuration, or as a configuration specialist, you might have done some work that's typically in line with an analyst. LinkedIn's difficult, really, in terms of how you get both that experience across. In reality, I think if an application or a CV is written well enough, them going on your LinkedIn, I don't think will be the difference between you getting a profile and not. So you could probably be a lot more generic on LinkedIn, whereas you could be a lot more targeted in the application and the NHS jobs process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If you're worried about LinkedIn, just make sure, because there's loads of different sections on LinkedIn. You can put your profile, you can just put your headline, you can put different things so you can explain some of that. But yeah, LinkedIn, if you apply for a job, the only thing I don't really like about LinkedIn, I'll be controversial, I don't like the quick apply button on LinkedIn. Drives me wild because people are so easy for you just to press it and off it goes, and you just end up with volume and volume. So you want to probably try and message the line manager or someone who's put the advert up on LinkedIn to see if you can have a conversation. I would always say that should be something you should think about. But yeah, separate profiles, tailor it each time should hopefully. Sounds like you've got lots of experience, so it might be quite tricky, but that should be something you should think about.
Fantastic. And we've probably got time for one more question if anyone's got anything else they would like to ask. No worries. But regardless of whether you'll be applying for roles in the next month, year or longer, we want to be hearing from you. So if you can please reach out to AFA at Hunter-Healthcare for further information on either roles we're recruiting for or how we can support your applications that you're submitting at the moment. Please feel free. So I put the email address in the chat. I'll also have a chat with Jane and Lizzie to see whether we can get that emailed out to you as well. But hopefully this won't be the last time that we hear from all of you. Excellent. Well, that's it from us. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you both, Adam and James. Really, really useful. Great content. So as I've said to everyone, this has been recorded and it will be shared back on the hub as well. And you've got the contact details there. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all.
Thank you.